Welcome to Bankable. I'm Doreen Abisundra, your host and a proponent of innovative technology and financing solutions for AI infrastructure, decarbonization, and energy security. This is the first Bankable podcast to showcase a national laboratory. Why the interest? Well, it's primarily twofold. First, the Technology Readiness Level, TRL, of new nuclear is often questioned by the financing community. TRL is measured in a range between 1 and 9. Who's to say which level is applicable? Is that technology just at the early research stage, so TRL 1, or indeed closer to the 9 and ready to be commercialized? Has it been tested? Is there somewhere to go to so-called kick the tires on an operating model? Second, civil nuclear power is typically associated with electricity generation. Is there alternative utilization? Our guest today explains how one of the 17 national laboratories in the United States not only offers an unbiased view on TRL, including taking time to meet with and address investors' questions, but is also demonstrating that the heat generated in the fission process can be used to manufacture hydrogen, which in turn is utilized to manufacture low-carbon fertilizer, synthetic fuels, or even decarbonize a petroleum refinery. Essentially, making every watt count, offering additional revenue streams, ensuring cybersecurity awareness, and enabling new nuclear to affordably meet consumer demand. The breadth and depth of knowledge gleaned in this chat is too wide to summarize, so let's just get going. Before that, to introduce Sod's Law to a global audience, an example is where the interviewer picks the perfect recording location, only to be faced with an unplanned background chatter of the day. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Shannon, to the podcast. I'm going to get right straight into it, and we're going to start with the very first question to tell the audience who you are, what describes you best, and perhaps tell us a little bit about your current profession and your career history.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Doreen, for this opportunity to speak with you today. As you said, I'm Shannon Bragg-Sitton. I'm an associate laboratory director at Idaho National Laboratory, specifically for the Energy and Environment Science and Technology Directorate. I really got started in energy systems very early with my first job. I was a high school student and had an opportunity to work on a space nuclear power program. I was fascinated by these energy systems. I was fascinated by nuclear energy that can really pack a lot of energy in a very small package. And I was hooked from there. And so I went into nuclear engineering. I completed a bachelor's degree in nuclear engineering from Texas A&M, went on to graduate school at University of Michigan in nuclear engineering and did a lot of research on space nuclear power and propulsion systems. And since then have worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, taught for a few years back at my alma mater at Texas A&M, and then ultimately landed here at Idaho National Laboratory, where I've been now for about 15 years and have had a really incredible opportunity to work across many different technology areas, ranging from those very small space nuclear systems to the development of microreactor technologies, so reactors for remote terrestrial Earth applications, as well as advanced nuclear fuels and energy systems integration. And we can certainly talk more about that. But my passion is in how we use energy better. How do we use energy more effectively? These are major investments that support our lives. And we need to do that right. We need to make sure that we bring these technologies to our communities in a way that is safe and effective and affordable.
That's such an incredible career that you've had so far. And clearly, there's so much interest these days in the concept of nuclear, or at least we are seeing that here on this side of the pond. And maybe tell us a little bit more about the Idaho National Laboratory itself. What is it that it does? What exactly is its ambition, and what your role is within the INL, please?
Absolutely. So Idaho National Laboratory is a U.S. Department of Energy laboratory. We are one of 17 national laboratories in the United States, and we are the nuclear energy laboratory, which means we're operated by the Office of Nuclear Energy. So that is our primary focus. Our work is broken across 5 different mission directorates, science and technology directorates. As I mentioned earlier, I lead the Energy and Environment Directorate. That's one of our non-nuclear directorates at the nuclear laboratory. And it supports our overall mission as a laboratory to truly change the world's energy future, as well as secure our nation's critical infrastructure. So what that means is my directorate looks at how we bring those energy technologies together. We work on the development of many different energy technologies, such as bioenergy and geothermal and water power. And we look at how those systems can better integrate with our nuclear energy systems to support electric applications, the grid, as well as to support utilization of thermal energy or heat in our industrial applications like chemical manufacturing or steel manufacturing and petroleum refining. And so we work across so many different technology areas to ensure that we better utilize those resources that we have. A lot of what I do now really builds from those space applications that I did early in my career. When we think about it, if we're going to put a power system on the moon or Mars, we don't throw energy away when we have extra. We need to use every watt of energy that we have because it takes so much to get it to that location. We need to be doing the same thing here terrestrially. And a lot of the work in our directorate that I lead really focuses on how we use that energy effectively to maintain affordability and to inject those non-emitting energy resources into all of our aspects, all the aspects of life that we have. We see growing energy demands, and we want to make sure that we meet those demands in a way that is cost effective and reliable.
I think you've touched upon something that's so fundamental in the conversation in nuclear, because very often when I'm speaking to either developers or potential investors, the mindset is that nuclear is just for the electricity. But talking about hydrogen, the opportunity to harness heat, these are, you're right, ancillary or what I term derivatives, for lack of a better word, of the conversation in nuclear. Perhaps could you expound with an example, Shannon, of how you would see the nuclear power plant, whether it's an SMR or a large-scale reactor or even a microreactor, having these additional benefits to society?
Absolutely. So nuclear energy is primarily producing heat. That's the number one output from a fission system, it's heat. Now, traditionally, we take that heat and we convert it to electricity and put it on the grid. But many of these applications actually require heat. So one of the research areas that we focus on within my research directorate is hydrogen production, specifically high temperature hydrogen production that utilizes both heat and electricity to be very efficient in how we make hydrogen and oxygen from water and steam, ultimately. That hydrogen now could be just an intermediate product. We can think of it as an energy carrier akin to an electron that carries electricity on the grid. Now we can have hydrogen that carries that energy from a nuclear plant to a chemical manufacturing facility. That might be utilized to make ammonia-based fertilizers. We may want to use that alongside captured CO2 to make synthetic fuels. And we may use that hydrogen in our petroleum refining processes. So we talk a lot about hydrogen as a potential energy application, but it really is just an intermediate step to so many of these other things that we need in our lives. And by looking at these alternative utilization pathways for that nuclear energy, we can actually de-risk how we deploy that nuclear energy. We hear a lot about increases in demand for electricity due to artificial intelligence and data centers, and as you know, all this energy that they're going to require. But will that all come at the same time? Maybe we need to look at other pathways for that energy utilization to get to products now, today, and increase the value of some of those products in the market. For example, we may look at coal processing. That's a carbon-based resource. Can we upgrade that to consumer products like plastics or the asphalt that we use in our roads or tires, and take that resource, instead of combusting it, use clean nuclear energy to convert that to an end product that we need each and every day? By looking at these alternative paths, now we are looking at a utilization for this clean nuclear energy that has a revenue stream regardless of what the electricity demand is. We know that electricity demand has variation, daily, weekly, seasonally, and we want to make sure that we have a pathway for how that energy is going to be used. And when we look at these other utilization paths to high value products, now we've increased the value of nuclear, we've increased the affordability overall, and we've injected more and more clean energy to sectors that typically utilize fossil fuels to provide the heat that they need to process these materials.
Exceptionally interesting there. And I suppose this is a good time to talk a little bit about what Idaho National Laboratory does, perhaps collaboratively with the other 16, as you mentioned, there are 17 national laboratories, or do all the laboratories focus on different things? Perhaps let's start there.
Each of the laboratories has a focal point, a main area that they work on, but we certainly collaborate and coordinate our work significantly. So for example, of those 17, we have 3 laboratories that are referred to as applied energy laboratories: INL for nuclear energy, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory for renewables, and the National Energy Technology Laboratory that focuses on fossil energy. So these 3 laboratories have come together significantly to look at how we utilize each of these technologies, each of these generation sources, what are the development needs for each of those, and how will they come together in these integrated systems to support our energy demands from electricity to heat applications. We also look at some of these application areas, hydrogen, for example. We lead within the National Laboratory System for high temperature electrolysis. It couples very well to the thermal energy that nuclear can provide. And our colleagues at the Renewable Energy Laboratory focus on low temperature electrolysis, which utilizes electricity that couples very well to renewable technologies. So when we look across the laboratories, we then also have many laboratories that we refer to as Office of Science laboratories. They work on lower readiness level technologies that can then feed these applied energy technologies. So when we look across at different technology areas, the labs are intended to complement one another. Yes, there is a little competition at the boundaries in some of these, but truly we look for these complementary areas where we can bring technologies to market. The role of the national laboratories is to bridge from very early stage research up to the point that it can be adopted by industry and taken to a commercial product.
Excellent. And the reason I ask that is because as investors, whether they're equity or debt providers, or perhaps even the earlier stages like seed and VC, or the entire supply chain of financing needs some level of comfort that the concepts that we're talking about within nuclear is understood, is at a technology readiness level that is so-called bankable. So it's great to hear that there is collaboration, innovation between you and then within INL. And competition is always good, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So let me just ask you the question then. How do you see INL and your role in contributing to the 3 themes that are prevailing these days: energy transition, AI advancement, and decarbonization?
So INL is in a unique position in that we do technology development and demonstration across many of the energy technologies that will lead us into our future energy systems that can support this growing energy demand, whether they be renewable energy, fossil energy resources, or nuclear being our main focal area here. But we also look at how these technologies come together. And a little bit about Idaho. We are a very large laboratory. Here at the laboratory, we've demonstrated 52 different reactors over our 75-year history. We are located on a large amount of land, about 890 square miles. So this is quite phenomenal here in the Idaho desert, and that land area really gives us the opportunity to demonstrate these new technologies such that industry is confident in how they will come together and how they will be utilized. We're also doing significant research in AI and how AI and machine learning can help us to design better systems, but then in the operation and control of these systems to be very efficient in how they operate. And we can demonstrate these technologies on systems that are at scale. So right now we are working toward building an energy technology proving ground alongside all of our efforts to demonstrate new reactor technologies. We expect our 53rd reactor to be demonstrated within the next year or two, working with industry. So that's one thing that's really important is we partner with industry in a lot of these areas to ensure that we are answering the questions they need answered to further invest and to deploy these technologies. AI is on the forefront of everything we talk about, and how AI intersects with nuclear energy is a very, very important question. We need to make sure that that is done in a very secure way, that we don't introduce any new cyber risks associated with these technologies. I mentioned in the mission of our laboratory, one area is securing our nation's critical infrastructure. We do a lot of work on physical and cybersecurity, and we have the test beds here to demonstrate how that intersects with these energy technologies of the future. And so it's really exciting. Within the next few years, we are demonstrating at-scale production of hydrogen, integration of microreactors with that hydrogen production, downstream utilization, all of that with an overlay of this cyber approach to ensure that these systems are safe and secure.
Did I hear that correctly? We're testing the 53rd reactor technology. If that's correct, tell us more about how you even got to 53. What are the different types of technologies that are being tested?
So Idaho National Lab has a really phenomenal background. I encourage all the listeners to go out to inl.gov to review some of what INL's history has entailed. We were established early on in the development of nuclear energy systems, and were able to demonstrate many different reactor technologies here in the Idaho desert as we were learning about nuclear energy from the very start. And we have since been able to operate many different reactors over those years. We currently have several operating. They are test facilities that allow us to test new fuels and materials. That's our advanced test reactor. We also have a transient reactor test facility that allows us to look at extreme situations for our system so that we understand how fuels will behave under rapid transient conditions. We need to understand accident scenarios as well to make sure that everything will be safe. And so that's some of the utilization pathway for that, how we use that research facility. And we have many of the companies that are developing these reactors coming to us to say, you have these facilities. We want to use those facilities and your expertise to understand how our reactors will operate. So these are public-private partnerships using DOE or Department of Energy facilities, working with the industry-developed reactor technologies. Just last week, there were 2 systems that were announced for first demonstration in our microreactor facility, referred to as DOME. Radiant and Westinghouse will be the first 2 partners that will demonstrate their advanced reactor systems prior to being able to go to the full system. That facility brings in a lot of the support technologies to demonstrate it in a very safe and controlled fashion. And then they will take that out to further facilities with their power conversion systems. We're also working with the Department of Defense on a microreactor for some of those defense facility applications for power and energy on those installations, and working with many other companies to utilize this large facility area, this land area, and our expertise to demonstrate technologies before they go to a deployed location. So when I say 53 is coming, we have a timeline that shows many other reactors that are planning to be demonstrated here in Idaho. I think in a few years we could talk about when is number 60 coming online. There's many many different technologies. We've done light water reactor technologies, and when we start looking at what's coming down the line, any technology you can come up with is probably in that list. Liquid metal cooled systems, molten salt cooled systems, as well as helium cooled systems. So we're working with many of these technology vendors to understand how those systems will operate. And it's really very exciting. We have so many different technologies being developed in the private sector, and they do need the national laboratories and our unique facilities to help support that next step in development and demonstration of their systems.
This is absolutely insightful and exciting at the same time. Do you see any of these reactors being fundamentally specific or useful for a certain region or a certain cause? Because one of the conversations we're having is that we can use nuclear energy to reduce or decarbonize energy intensive industries such as steel and cement, as you highlighted at the start of our conversation. So is there a categorization of these reactors?
So if we look across the range of nuclear technologies that are in development, we can find technologies at any scale from a few megawatts up through gigawatt scale systems like the AP1000s that have been deployed. Their Westinghouse reactor designs that have been deployed at the plant Vogtle in Georgia recently. So those are light water reactor technologies at that very large scale. We also have small modular technologies at the hundreds of megawatt scale, and we can find different technologies across those different cooling systems in those very small systems to the small modular systems. And all of these technologies have a role to play. What's the major difference? We have different sizes. So now we have a menu of options that we can pick the right size for the application. So X Energy is the company that's working on a small modular reactor that is planned for deployment with a Dow chemical facility. So that's a 100 megawatt system that will see its first application directly coupled with a chemical plant. We also have the Natrium design that's being advanced in the state of Wyoming by TerraPower and their partners, and that's a liquid metal cooled design. One of the major differences when we look at the different cooling technologies is the temperature at which they operate. Now, I do want to dispel a myth. You don't need a high temperature reactor to produce hydrogen via high temperature electrolysis. In fact, we have demonstration systems that are using light water reactors that operate at lower temperatures at the 300 degrees Celsius arena around that temperature. Now, as we move up in temperature, we increase our ability to be more efficient in how we produce that energy and how we produce electricity. But there are many technologies that can allow us to upgrade the heat to get to the higher temperatures of application around that 700 degrees Celsius for high temperature electrolysis. But what is really very interesting is we have these systems being developed at any scale you could really come up with. and these different technologies that operate at different temperatures such that you can select what may work best for your application. And yes, there are going to be some technologies that work better for certain applications than others, but it takes that evaluation and it takes a discussion. Let's say there's a steel manufacturer that wants to use nuclear energy to support their needs. It's a conversation to ask, what are their requirements? What is the power level? What's the heat requirement for these applications? And really walk through that and select the technology that's right for them. Now, things like a large-scale light water reactor, there's a very significant history there. There's a supply chain established, and that may be a good option for some of these needs. Some of these data centers are very, very large. They may just need electricity, and they may need gigawatt scale electricity. They may select something like a large-scale light water reactor that has already been built previously, and thus shortcut some of the learning necessary to build those systems. The more we build the same design, the lower the cost will be because those learnings are there. The supply chain is there. As we look to some of these other systems, smaller scales open up opportunities for additional manufacturers to join that supply chain. When we have large scale systems, they have large components. There's limited companies that can make those components. But when we get smaller, it opens the door to much more competition and many more companies being able to join in that once those reactors begin to be developed and deployed, then that supply chain is put in place and we'll see the same learnings and cost reductions in those technology areas as well.
Phenomenal. And again, all this sort of knowledge that you're sharing is so vital. For example, to the credit application paper that you would have to put in as an investor or a banker that's going to your credit committee to get approval to put out the equity or debt. So from a financing perspective, because obviously this podcast is about the role of financing in nuclear, does the INL or do you have a view on the capex cost or the levelized cost of electricity from these new technologies?
So that's not my area of expertise, but I'll offer a few thoughts here. First, levelized cost of electricity is no longer the best measure for these technologies because it is assuming that this generation technology is only going to produce electricity. When you start looking at systems being developed today, you'll start seeing more discussion on levelized cost of energy, as well as levelized cost of hydrogen, where that hydrogen now is that energy carrier, not necessarily that end product. But we need to think more broadly about this rather than just that very narrow LCOE focus where E is electricity. So that's something we need to consider. We also need to understand that the first unit will be more costly than subsequent units. We have looked at some of the recent builds in Western countries, such as here in the United States. The first system is very expensive. We had a lot of learning to do. We hadn't built large systems for a very long time, and we needed to learn how to do that. So the second unit of this new technology that was built at Plant Vogtle, I believe, was about 25% lower in cost than the first unit of that AP1000. And we can look at those learnings. And so I hesitate to give any answers based on those two units that have been built. There's data that's out there, and they were very costly. We are targeting technologies to come down that cost profile as we start getting into multiple units and reduce those costs. We've done a number of studies looking at where they would land if they were $5,000 USD per kilowatt hour, if they were 4,000, 3,000, and different technologies are looking to different price points and have different predictions. And I really hesitate to say where we are now until we see some of these being built and where those cost savings can come with subsequent units. From an investment perspective, we have seen dramatic increases in interest from investors in nuclear energy. Over the last year, I believe that we here at the laboratory have hosted 3 different investor summits where these investors want to come and learn about the technologies. They want to understand how are they being developed, how are they being demonstrated, what are the potential pathways for utilization of these systems. That's historic. We've not had that type of interest from investors previously coming to a national laboratory to learn about the technologies, to say, give it to me straight. You're an unbiased developer, essentially, of these energy systems. We're not trying to sell anything. We are simply here to look at the assets that can be brought to the table for our energy needs and how those can be utilized. So we're a trusted information source to those investor communities. And I would encourage others that would like to learn more to reach out to the laboratory, to talk to us, to understand the technologies. What are the trade-offs? No technology, the technologies are all a bit different. No technology is perfect. Everything has its pros and its cons, and areas that may need some more questions to be answered. And we can be that honest broker to help answer some of those questions. We're not picking winners. We're looking at technologies and how they can be used. We've seen some significant changes recently from the financing perspective with changes at the World Bank and how they can invest in nuclear. That's very exciting to the community because, yes, it does require significant investment to develop these systems and to deploy these systems. But I'd like the listeners to remember, we're not talking about putting an asset on the grid or into our energy systems for 20 years or even 40 years. We're talking 80 to 100 years. We have technologies where initial licenses are for 40 years. And then after review and understanding how their systems are performing, those are being extended to 60 to 80 years. These are investments that will provide a return for many decades to come. And that's a very important thing to consider. We're even seeing some of our facilities here in the United States that were previously shut down and planned for full decommissioning being restarted because those investments are sunk costs. Those facilities are still viable. And with some upgrades of some of the components, they can be brought back online to support those growing energy demands.
Well, Shannon, that clearly shows you were being exceptionally humble. There is so much insight into the financing world that you've brought in. And usually at this point of time, I ask the guest what makes your company allow the bankability of nuclear for investors and lenders. The first thing I have to say is I heard the word unbiased. You provide unbiased feedback. Would that be one of the key offerings that you have for making nuclear bankable? And perhaps, what else are you doing that's making the sector bankable?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, the role of the national laboratories is to help these technologies that are on the forefront to move from low readiness level to commercial viability. So we are answering some of the key technical questions that are present with many new technologies, not just nuclear, but that is our primary focus. We're answering the questions that ensures that these technologies can come forward. We support the industry writ large. Yes, we do work with some independent individual companies and partnerships, but in general, what we do is we are answering questions for the industry overall. We are unbiased. We're bringing new nuclear fuels to the marketplace. We are bringing new materials to the marketplace so that they can be utilized with the data behind it to demonstrate how they operate, to reduce risk associated with new technologies, so that these investors can be confident that this isn't just a paper reactor, but it's something that has experimental data behind it. It has a solid basis and can truly, they can be confident then that once deployed, it will be operated well, it will bring energy to where it's needed and what it's planned to be used for, and thus reduce their investment risk. It's never going to be zero. We know that. But our goal is to help reduce risk associated with new technologies that we need for our growing energy demands overall.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously, a return can only be made with taking some level of risk, isn't it? Um, I'm conscious of how much we've taken from you, but I can't let you go without maybe addressing the conversation on radioactive waste management. Tell us a little bit more about the waste, how we can possibly recycle, store, or just deal with radioactive waste.
So I'm glad you brought in the idea of recycling because number one, our nuclear materials, our used nuclear fuel is just that it's used. There's still 90% of the potential energy remaining in that fuel when we've put it through a light water reactor. That's a resource that we can access. So yes, there are pathways to recycle that used fuel to take out the high level radioactive materials and to pull out what is still usable and highly valuable to our nuclear systems going forward. It's really a resource and an asset, not just a liability associated with a used material. We also have many technical approaches to managing our used nuclear fuel. We have technical solutions. These are valid solutions. These are options that have been demonstrated. The challenge is more political and understanding the community acceptance. We need to educate more on these communities. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about what used nuclear fuel looks like. It's not a liquid. It's not moving everywhere. It's contained in solid materials. We know where every little bit of it is, and we know how to manage this. So I think it's something that we have to address. We have to have long-term storage repositories for these materials. It's not something that we can just leave in a cabinet, and that's not what we do. We know actually where every little bit of it is and how to manage that. But we do need to work with the communities to help them understand what this material looks like and how we can treat it and how we can use it going forward. It's something that early in the development of nuclear systems, I don't think we necessarily did as good of a job as we could have in educating communities about what this looks like. And now as we go out and do more of that education, we have communities requesting to host interim storage facilities for used nuclear fuel. As they understand it, they see it as an opportunity for their communities and economic benefit for their communities and jobs. And we just need to simply do that more.
So if I had to ask you, bankable or not bankable, which word would you choose when it comes to nuclear, as civil nuclear for our energy needs?
Absolutely bankable, and I will add essential to our future.
Shannon, we first had the privilege of hearing your insight when the Nuclear Now movie premiered in the UK at the Royal Institute.
Mhm.
What we've heard today, I can summarize, is just the tip of the iceberg of the knowledge that sits behind you and your team. So perhaps tell us where and how people, the audience, can get in contact with you, and how they can learn a little bit more about what the INL is doing.
I'd love to share that. So, number one, if you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can go to inl.gov. We have a lot of resources on INL's website associated with the history of the laboratory. You can even take a virtual tour of the laboratory to see our incredible facilities here. And you can reach out to our communications team for more information and to connect to the different research teams associated with the laboratory here. And if you're an investor and you want to know more about these technologies, reach out. If you'd like to visit the laboratory and talk to some of the researchers, those things can be arranged as well. As I mentioned, we've hosted many summits that are with the non-technical community that want to understand this more so that they can understand how to help move it forward. So those are opportunities that we offer. Our teams bring huge numbers of people through the laboratory every year to help demystify these technologies and make them much more understandable, more approachable, so that we can truly adopt them and use them to the greatest extent possible.
Shannon, thank you so very much for your insight, for your time, and for just sharing and initiating this knowledge with the audience that's going to be listening in. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Bankable. For early access to energy transition pioneers and to learn how to structure the investment solutions described in this episode and throughout the series, subscribe to the podcast and get in contact at frescocleantech.solutions.